welcome everybody. This is a session on data-driven design led by the industry strategy funded R&D project, the Business of Fashion, Textiles and Technology, led by University of the Arts London. My name's Jane Harris. I'm Director of Business of Fashion, Textiles and Technology, and we've convened today 6 speakers that are going to briefly cover some of the work in relation to data-driven design that BFTT is leading on, and also some work from some of our partners and some of the SMEs that we are funding throughout this project. I'm just going to come out of speaker mode and share the screen. The makeup of the session will be 3 15-minute pieces, 2 speakers speaking for, and then a 5-minute Q&A to follow. Please do send us questions. We'd really like to turn this into a good, vibrant discussion, and we look forward to show you the work in due course. So as I've said, my name's Jane Harris, Director of Research and Innovation at University of the Arts London, and also Director of the Data Business of Fashion, Textiles and Technology Creative R&D Partnership, funded by Industrial Strategy, hosted by Arts and Humanities Research Council. And this session is on data-driven design, AI, immersion and visualization in fashion. We've got some great speakers joining us, 3 15-minute sections, each chaired by a different individual. This session starts with Chair Kate Goldsworthy. Kate, handing over to you.
Thank you, Jane. So we're kickstarting the first 15-minute session with a couple of companies that we're working with at the moment on the BFTT partnership. I'm Kate Goldsworthy. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Circular Design at University of the Arts London, and also the deputy director of this BFTT partnership cluster. And the 2 companies that I'm really thrilled to introduce in this session are AWAYTOMARS. We've got Alfredo Orobio, who's CEO of AWAYTOMARS, which is an online platform to promote design thinking, advance creativity and promote profit sharing. And I think it's fair to say its digital platform is one of the most innovative in the fashion industry right now. And we've got Peter Needle, who is the CEO of Segura, a company I'm very lucky to work with on the BFTT program myself. Segura is an innovative software provider created with the aim to combine digital expertise with detailed knowledge of global supply chains. And really, you know, the reason behind that is to enable business to create more ethical and sustainable practices in their supply chain. So 2 sort of very different perspectives in this digital space. But for now, I look forward to hearing from you both. Handing over to Alfredo first.
Oh, thank you so much, Jane and Kate. I'm gonna tell a bit how everything started with AWAYTOMARS, and then we can move to questions if you guys have any questions later. But basically, AWAYTOMARS started in 2014. Was doing a master's course, and my dissertation was people were using social media and all the social networks to share creative information and to share to be expressive with creativity online. And I've started mapping Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook, and what I found was a huge amount of data, disorganized data and quality data there, but the ideas that were there were not taken further. So all those amazing sketches, all these amazing ideas for fashion products were just lost in this online. So what my idea on that year in 2014 was to create a platform or a place where people could share information, share all these creative ideas in the same place and work together to take the idea further. And this the project took form in 2014. We launched with 40 designers a collection, and then we start organizing all this data that we received, and then we grew the platform and the community to 15,000 designers. So basically how it works, the process is we have an online forum. So we work with 2 collections a year that people with like very broad themes, like light or forests or any kind of like a very broad subject. And people submit ideas to this related to this themes. And I think the most interesting thing of the platform is that people co-create and they work together on the same idea. So we have a selection process that we point the most interesting ideas with the help of the community, and those ideas are taken further into the market. So we support the designer with the entire prototyping process, the production, the promotion, and the sales. And at the end, when we finalize the circle, we pay back to the community. So we pay back to the designer, the creator, the idea, but also everyone that contributed to the design. The community has been growing since 2014. We've reached almost 18,000 users this year. And well, we started to get approached by other brands, by other traditional brands that want also to use and to explore the user and the community power of creativity. So we've been doing, we've done very interesting collaborations with Melissa, that's a very big shoes company from Brazil, with the Woolmark company and Harvey Nichols. We did a capsule collection just about merino wool that was also co-created by the platform. And we are now on the latest bits of launching a collection with M. Missoni. That is the Italian fashion house, and is our first luxury company that we've been working. And and that was our very interesting place to be, because it just showed the potential of using the creative community and the creative power of this network to innovate in fashion products. So with the Missoni project, it was we partnered with IBM to collect all this data set that we received from the platform and analyze the data set through Watson, the AI tool that they developed. And what Watson did was to point the best routes that we should be approaching on the design aspect, and then also creating also developing the patterns and the prints that we should be creating for this piece. So in this collection, we're going to have 3 pieces that are being created by Watson and being pointed by Watson. And what we're going to try to compare is if they sell better or not on the PDV. So this is our first stage of applying AI also in the designing process, and applying AI as a collaborator and a co-creator in the platform. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of a quick overview of what we do. And if you have any specific questions, we can do that later.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alfredo. I've heard you speak speak a couple of times now, and it blows my mind every time. It's just fascinating. I'm Peter Needle, the CEO of Segura. I'm just going to give you a very brief whistle-stop tour of what we do, kind of how and why we do it, and then a little bit about the project we're doing with BFTT and Kate and Jane. In terms of the background of Segura, I started the business with a group of lovely people about 8 years ago, and that was while I was working as a consultant in the packaging industry at a business that sold labels, tickets, and packaging into large retailers. And their customers were the likes of Next and Debenhams, George, Asda, Arcadia Group. And part of that process involved me talking to these big retailers, and they kept coming up with the same problem every time I talked to them, which was they order garments from manufacturers all over the world, And often, in order to make sure that the quality of their components and fabrics were at a high standard, they often specified where those components should come from and which suppliers should supply them. But they knew that 9 times out of 10, the garment manufacturers ignored their wishes and just went to their friends down the road, essentially to get cheaper prices. And it wasn't too much of a problem, apart from the fact occasionally things would happen from a quality perspective. But in those early discussions, one of those four, and if you'll forgive me for not mentioning which one, had the horrible situation of a Telegraph reporter turning up to their head office with videos of 9-year-olds making their care labels. And they were obviously horrified about this and really keen to sort out a way of stopping it. And that's how Segura was invented. So you'll see on this slide, on the left-hand side that's open at the moment, this is a typical supply chain without Segura, where purchase orders are coming from the retailer to the manufacturers, and the manufacturers are effectively left to get on ordering their fabric and components to fulfill those orders on behalf of the retailer. The retailer basically stops having any visibility whatsoever, and once that purchase order's gone, until they receive their garments back into their distribution center. And then with the big reveal on the right side, things change with Segura. And what we've developed is effectively an order management solution. So we take a data feed of those purchase orders into the Segura platform, and the garment manufacturers and all of the component suppliers use the platform to receive those orders and fulfill those orders, which allows each actor within the system to see what's going on, and also provides an audit trail to make sure that all of the components have come from the audited and approved sources of the retailer and cannot be supplied by unauthorized sources. So we create a closed ecosystem for them and lock down that supply chain. That has various effects, but it gives them, as you see, there are 5 key value drivers there on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but the major ones are it gives them security over their supply chain, cost reduction, massive risk mitigation. You know the suppliers that are within your supply chain, and if they're checked and audited, you can be fairly certain that they're doing the right thing for you. I'll tell you a little bit about the future. We do all sorts of other things, but the exciting project that we're doing with the BFTT is we get asked 2 questions most commonly. The first one is by retailers saying, can you give me the name of a really good garment supplier that will supply this kind of garment in a location around the world? And often from garment manufacturers and other manufacturers coming onto our site asking to join our system so they can sell their lovely produce to our retailers. We came up with the idea of creating a marketplace that would bring those 2 groups together. But being Segura and at the core of our business is ethics, sustainability and circularity, we just didn't want to create any old marketplace. We wanted one that would drive up standards. And that's what we're working with BFTT now. We're sort of midway through a research project on that. And what we're hoping to do by the end of that project is have a really good understanding of everything, all the standards that exist out there for assessing manufacturing sites. So that will enable us to be able to drive up those standards and give an incentive for those standards to be driven up by each of the manufacturers that join the system. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Goodness, spot on time. We've got exactly our 5 minutes for questions. I'd just like to kick start. I'm sure there'll be some questions from the audience, but just to begin with, I mean, it strikes me you're both working in sort of different but very complementary areas of innovation in this sort of fashion system, you know, right through from innovation in how we design in the first place and how we work through that design value chain, right through to understanding the production and the realization of the product. And I think the sustainability sort of innovation and potential of both of your systems is really embedded. Could you both just talk a little bit more about how you see the impact perhaps more on the human aspects? So, for example, Alfredo, I'm fascinated by the the removal of the superstar designer in a way from your process, and how you've created a much more open and equal kind of framework for your designers to work within. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
So what we do, and I think the main challenge and the main goal here is to democratize and to put light in the entire creative process. But we are not reinventing anything new, inventing anything new here. Basically, just showing how the normal creative process works. Instead of having a creative director, a creative name, or like a celebrity designer taking the credit for everything, we have a very broad group and democratic group of designers from all over the globe creating and being rewarded for their ideas and for how they contributed to the final design. And then going back to the sustainability and how I see these things moving and contributing towards that, I can see this co-creation platform working in two different ways that can support that. One is testing this product to the consumer before it's produced. So we already putting the idea to the consumer before it's producing and trying to see if there's a demand or not, avoiding any sampling costs or unnecessary inventory. And another thing that we can, and that's my dream in the future, is to use the co-creation and use this AI as a supporter and as a co-creator to avoid unnecessary waste on the manufacturing, and also like trying to think on a circular designing process. So using AI, teaching AI first what economy and was a circular design, and trying to apply that concept into the designing process. So I can see those two ways of bringing sustainability into the future of AWAYTOMARS platform.
That's incredibly exciting, Alfredo. Peter, in Segura, it feels that your potential for disruption is more on a systemic level, and the way companies, brands, and the supply chain might interact in the future. Could you talk a little bit about, collaboration between brands and sort of shared mission?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things really briefly, because I'm conscious of time. Where Alfredo, the design process is exceptionally important, and I think where we as a business can help in that is that if the designers have created a fabulous garment that they're using sustainable materials, materials that are easy to be recycled, what a system like Segura ensures is that those ultimately are the materials that they want to go in their design. That's where they come from. And they're not substituted for anything else. So that locking down of ecosystems is really important. The other side of that is, from a sourcing perspective, is with the data we have in the system, we can also work with the designers in that sense, thinking about where would it be best in the world to source that to have the least impact from a carbon perspective and all of the sustainability goals. So there's a natural kind of handover there. And then the other thing that we're looking at, which you alluded to in the question, is we've now got a number of large retailers on board that are thinking along the lines of, well, they're all sourcing similar products in similar parts of the world, and at component level, there are a lot of generic items in there. And there are probably much better ways of producing those at scale in a more sustainable way. And by collaborating together and offering the volumes to those sustainable suppliers, they can offer more sustainable goods, but still keep prices relatively low.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Peter. I could keep going, but we're a minute over now, so I will hand over, and please keep the questions in the chat. We'll have a bit of time at the end. Thanks, you. Kate. Thank you.
We've got some questions coming up in the chat, actually, which is really interesting. So we've got a 10-15 minute session at the end where we'll have the opportunity for wider conversation. I've got the pleasure of introducing, first of all, Lynn Murray, who's the director of the Digital Anthropology Lab at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts.
Hi, thank you, Jane.
Lynn, over to you.
I am director of the Digital Anthropology Lab, as Jane kindly suggested. I'm also co-founder and non-executive director of Halicion Augmented Retail, both of whom support the BFTT project across multiple touchpoints. Today, I'd like to share 4 projects that highlight our speculative practice, effectively creating with prototyping as an agile form of research practice. So just briefly, the Digital Anthropology Lab really is set up to reimagine what digital has got to do with the human experience. We sit within research and innovation within London College of Fashion, University of the Arts. And we operate across areas looking at the body, craft, society and environment across a range of technologies, including programmable matter, Internet of Things, gaming. We look specifically at AI, which we're doing with the AWAYTOMARS project with Alfredo, who you've just listened to, and certainly looking at all sorts of augmented experiences there. So just 4 projects today to kind of introduce our approach to you with. I'd like to start off with challenge number 1. We operate in a kind of thematic-led environment within the Digital Anthropology Lab, and we create a series of challenges that connect both our student groups, our academic collaborators, and our industry partners. These are projects that are speculative in nature, but they're almost a means by which we practice how we are exploring with technology to better understand what the technology could do. So this project, looking at topical as it is now, where we're not really allowed to touch anything in a public realm, we're describing as no hands. So a project that encourages interaction with ourselves, each other, things and garments, but without touching. We are living in an increasing world of screen-based interfaces, but how can we mediate against that? And so very briefly, we have a garment that senses connected parties in your social network and shapeshifts in order to change its dimension according to who it's interacting with. That's a garment on the left-hand side. We have a garment that provocatively asks you to stop looking at your screen-based thing and stop touching your digital interface. And on the right-hand side, we have a very visceral experience of a future technology using a material that is looking at creating a new sensual way of reimagining what 3D printing prototyping might be. So that's capturing our no hands approach. If I could ask you to move on to the next slide, Jane, thank you very much. We have challenge number 2, where we're looking at the Internet of Fashion things. What does this mean? What is a fashion thing? What is a garment or an experience that allows us to connect automatically with another? And this project was very successfully able to explore ways in which our daily experience of walking around the street could track our geolocation and connect it hypothetically in code form to our smart washing machines, knowing how polluted a garment had been, therefore how much to wash it. And when we consider how much of an expanding area of research garment pollution is through domestic washing, this is a fantastic proposition or hypothetical lab research project that explores exactly that, or gives sense of where we could start to explore these types of technologies. Moving on to challenge number 3, Jane. Thank you. We have a project looking at programmable fashion matter. So how can we create garments that shapeshift, garments that do other things, garments that are responsive in new ways? It looks like a collection here, but it's very much a gathering of technical elements. We have a garment that is supporting breastfeeding mothers to massage and simulate breast milk production. We have a garment that changes shape according to sensed threat. So it's We called it the porcupine jacket for specific reasons. It has kind of spikes that appear from the back if it senses the wearer's distress in any way. And we also have a garment that knows your mind more than you do by inflating or constricting upon latent sexual desire. Number 4, if we could move on to challenge number 4, please, Jane, our final challenge. So this challenge is called draping interfaces, and has been a piece of work that we've been looking at around how do we understand what an interface is? What could it be? How do we, again, move it beyond this kind of rectangular screen that we are all inhabiting at the moment? This project was launched at the start of lockdown. We had a distributed grouping of researchers and students participating in this project. And we created effectively a multi-narrative, real-time online performance, whereby we were gifted our own bodies back in digital form and simply encouraged to dance. The act of dancing and regaining our own bodies from our disembodied heads that we're inhabiting in the digital realm was a fascinatingly emotional experience and emotional performance. And it allowed us to really consider, how do we use emerging technologies, emerging filters, emerging layers of reality in a virtual form to create new ways of being and thinking about how we are human in this digital world. That's my 5 minutes, and I will hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. And introducing Shamarahman, who's also linked to the Digital Anthropology Lab, the Business of Fashion, Textiles and Technology, and is delivering a project with AWAYTOMARS through our SME R&D program.
Absolutely.
Shama,
thank you very much, Jane. So I was invited to be the R&D project lead on AWAYTOMARS's new and exciting and pioneering AI and human co-creation platform, which Alfredo has told you all about today already. And some of the sort of things that I've been looking at are how AI can be used to spark creativity, obviously, and also how it can enhance and enable collaborative fashion design. Just a little bit of background as to why I am involved in this. I have a interdisciplinary PhD in the neuroscience of creativity. I am myself an artist in multiple different areas, music, theater, and I like combining digital and analog. And recently, I have been looking at AI and how to utilize it in order to spark creativity with my own company, NeuroCreate. All of this approach combining together to create something called neurodesign. And since being a part of this project, Jane, if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, we have been looking at what does co-creation actually mean and where does AI reside? Where is its role in enabling co-creation, not only between designers, but potentially also between consumers? And how would it exactly spark creativity? So what you will see here in this poster is actually some of the results of my playing around with AI explorations. You'll see, as Alfredo's mentioned, Missoni, for example, being one of the big dresses here. So this is actually a combination of Missoni, ATM's community of designers, and the AI. And at the bottom, you'll see some of the sort of other sort of projects that AWAYTOMARS has been involved in, again, related, mixed up with AI. And I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth as to what these sort of explorations have been. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what you'll see is under over the textual prints, this is literally generative adversarial networks creating textures and prints not necessarily related to the AWAYTOMARS aesthetics, just to begin with. And then we utilized how that could be then impressed upon garments to have the shape of the garments masked. And below that, you'll see that this is us bringing in some of the AWAYTOMARS's aesthetics, but mixed in with completely non-fashion areas and designs, such as images of mountains. And right at the bottom, you'll see on the bottom left, is actually, it's being mixed with botanical illustrations, plants, but also birds. And you'll see that the AI comes up with potentially fully formed and fully fledged ideas but also these sorts of interesting liminal creative spaces. And could this also be used as some sort of sparker to creativity? Over on the right, you'll see some of the experimentation with potentially just different swathes of color, not necessarily texture. And then finally, what you'll see on the bottom right-hand corner are some of the most promising recent ones that we've been working on, which has at least 3 layers on top of it, with generated textures, AWAYTOMARS' aesthetics, and also bringing in these other sorts of sources of inspiration, which have nothing to do with fashion. But I would definitely wear one of these dresses. Now, if we go on to the very last slide, speaking of me wearing lots of these dresses, I believe we are going to be, well, I mean, what do you think? These are really cool, right? We are thinking of essentially curating a few of these AI-produced well, collaborations with humans in order to have a cool catway show at some point in the not too distant future. So I'm very happy to have all of your feedback on your thoughts on these creations. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I'm going to go back to the final slide from Shama, because I think my feedback is that I want a suitcase to fill with all of these dresses, and they'll need to be super long, but they're wonderful. Thank you very much. Very exciting, a bit of fashion disruption from both of you. So I'm really interested to understand there seem to be 2 different tracks, parallel tracks in the fashion scene, particularly around AI and machine learning at the moment. And one is around the concept of bespoke, and the other is around co-creation. And co-creation is not new, but certainly this digital space seems to be facilitating all kinds of new aspects of forms of co-creation, which we really couldn't have imagined many years ago. Lynn, I wonder if you would like to pick up on that and give us some sense of, you know, some of the students that you're working with, the industry that you're working with, for example, you know, how or what it is that they're inspired by in terms of that co-creation space that our normal design methods don't offer.
Thanks, Jane. I think if I answer that by considering how we've become socially kind of overloaded, if you like, by social media and Instagram, etc. We are living in an image-based world. Certainly in a Western environment, we are living in an image-based world. We are saturated by alignment of imagery and bubbles, not just COVID bubbles, but bubbles of creativity and bubbles of image alignment. And actually, as humans, we're constantly on the search for beauty. And how do we search that out if all we're seeing is the same thing? So I think there's a real valid space for AI in our current climate to really kind of wake us up a little bit and remember what it was like to have a sketchbook or take a photograph with an analog camera, or reconsider what it is that you're looking through your eyes. We're so saturated with imagery that perhaps sometimes it's hard to do that. And of course, what AI is coming along in its big, ugly way of doing is creating kind of the oddity that we have forgotten for such a long time. And the oddity is the space that is very appealing to creatives. And I think at the moment we're so at the cusp of what that can do. We're just fascinated by experimenting with it, particularly in a lab context. And that goes to both the bespoke and the co-creation element, I would suggest.
Very, very interesting. And in terms of industry interest in this space, so what's your experience of that? I mean, obviously DA Lab works in a kind of brokering way with both students and staff and external, those parties that are external to the university that want to find out more about how to connect to digital in new ways. You know, can you give us a sense of what you're seeing industry being interested in this space? Is it just gimmick to them? Are they kind of hang on to the coattails of the the new and the gimmick, or is there really genuine interest as to how these sort of ideas might drive?
I think gimmick as a word gets a bad name, but in a sense,
innovation.
we're living in a world where we're introduced to the opportunity of AI, and that opportunity hasn't been written yet. So the opportunity is to explore it, perhaps not in a gimmick fashion, but in a novel fashion. And it's that novelty which is super interesting for fashion brands, for example. But design, kind of immersive experiences, production of design and experience of design, these are such rich areas that we can amplify indefinitely with not just artificial intelligence, but a whole host of technologies. And certainly, I think the bespoke nature of what we are allowed or able to consider with emerging technologies as applied to industry partners is one of the things that allows us to have a kind of experimental approach. We're not able to provide a shopping list of possibility. We create what that could be, and that's what's ultimately hugely thrilling to work on, but it's also what drives businesses.
Thank you. Shama, if I can come to you, I think, so, you know, I've walked away with all of these pieces. They're in my suitcase. They're coming to life. They're all stunning. What do you think the future for this is? I mean, do you see us having a sort of design mechanism whereby more and more of our clothing is not necessarily bespoke, but certainly individualized? Where do you see this concept going, and what do you think a company like Missoni and AWAYTOMARS will seek most from working with AI and machine learning?
I suppose I'm a little biased being a creative. I particularly see its immense possibilities and options on how to actually help the creative process. As Lynn was saying, being able to spark you out of your normal way of thinking, that is by definition what creativity is. And I think it may be sort of underestimated, the sort of pure sort of delight and joy that can come from just that action, and kind of going, wow, I had not thought about that. And why, therefore, would a consumer not have the same sort of reaction to, wow, that looks really interesting, really different. I bet no one else has this on the street, because they won't, so, and each particular thing at least could be unique. And I think, therefore, it can actually also advance businesses' way of thinking about AI, not just as a way maybe of classifying, existing trends, for example, but actually truly being involved in the conversation to creating something new. And the way that I would see it is not to replace humans at all in this equation, but how to essentially be yet another sort of feather in the sort of creative hat. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I love the analogy of AI being another feather, such a material thing in the physical object of a hat. So thank you. On that note, I'm going to move on. I hope that we're going to be accruing some really terrific questions from the audience that's joining us for the end of this series. Lynn, I'm going to hand over to you to chair this next session.
Lynn, you're on mute.
Hi. So, long story short, I'm delighted to introduce Matthew Drinkwater, Director of the Fashion Innovation Agency at London College of Fashion. And I'd ask you to pen your questions as he's chatting, and we'll answer them shortly. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi everyone. I'm Matthew Drinkwater. I head up the Innovation Agency, and we have a really lovely remit from the college to explore emerging technology and its impact on the fashion and retail industry. And we try to build proof of concept to show to the fashion industry what's possible and how to try and accelerate the pace of change a little bit. Over the course of the past year or so, we've been, I guess, really fascinated in the possibility of creating digital humans, and have been working with photogrammetry and volumetric capture, but more recently with mobile scanning. And kind of what you can see here is Spencer Kelly from BBC Clip. Spencer came into the college October last year, I think. And we scanned Spencer with just a mobile phone, 2-minute scan with a couple of hours processing time. And you can begin to see the results here of really, really high quality capture that's done very quickly, that offers, I guess, that tantalizing proposition of kind of being able to scale digital content very, very quickly. And so I guess after that scan with Spencer, it pushed us on to where do we go? We jump on to maybe the next one, Jane. I think that's brilliant, thank you. The first obvious application for fashion and retail is in kind of much more realistic virtual try-on. And so here's just a very simple example of clothing and model scanned separately, where machine learning can adapt to the model size and begin to adjust the garments correctly. And if we can introduce much more compelling virtual try-on, then I think it begins to question what else might be possible in a more immersive experience. And so we started to look at kind of location-based experiences. And what you're seeing here is a project at London Fashion Week from a few years ago, where we worked with Lucasfilm's Immersive Entertainment Division, ILMX Lab, where we were able to introduce 2 hours of real-time rendered visual effects onto a physical environment, and created digital garments that were being driven by a motion capture performer. So alongside real models, you had digital models. And at one point in the show, the digital model was able to walk autonomously to the center of the stage, take a bow, and change her garments automatically from one to the other. And actually during rehearsals, it was really fascinating to talk to the mocap performer, because she came up to me and said, Matt, as I was wearing the digital garments, the 2 different styles felt quite differently. And I'm not sure how to walk in this digital garment, which was quite wild to me. She was just wearing a motion capture suit, a very fetching mocap suit, I will add, but one that I guess bears the possibility of, will digital garments begin to change our mood? But more than what it does to the wearer, it's the attendees that also had a massive impact on them. And so 90% of attendees said that they felt it made them understand the designer better. Many of them said it made them feel more close to the designer, but look at that, 78% said that knowing the narrative behind the collection in a more immersive way added a positive value. It's really interesting what immersive experiences are beginning to do. And so as my last video that I'll run in a second.
Our vision for the future is to see how consumers can interact with their wardrobe in a new way.
A digital human stylist is a digital replica of a human being.
It's your smart assistant who can make intelligent recommendations on what to wear.
We'll understand what's in your wardrobe, what's in your calendar, where you're going, who you're going to meet.
The digital human stylist is powered by Microsoft AI and natural language processing, which allows that interaction to just feel completely natural.
We designed the digital human stylist to be interacted with in a number of different ways. Mixed reality headset, such as the HoloLens 2. Likewise, you can interact with it through a tablet device or the mobile phone in your pocket.
The idea that you could introduce someone into your own household that you begin to form a trusting relationship with is something that could become really completely revolutionary for the industry. I mean, you can see we made gorgeous digital doubles of my gorgeous team members. Sadly, I chose not to go through that process, fortunately for the rest of the world. But it was really fascinating to see the impact of that. So I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Fascinating stuff, and I can't wait to ask you all my questions. I would like to now introduce Jane Harris, Director of Research and Innovation at UAL and Director of the BFTT project. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to be talking about a project that the Business of Fashion, Textiles and Technology is also funding, called Reimagining the Consumer and Retail Experience. This is a baseline piece of research which was first presented as a poster by Mark Denolis, aka Dino, who is the postdoc research fellow working with me on this project. I've worked for about 25 years in this field, looking at computer graphic imaging, in particular with textiles and dress. My background is in textiles, and when I began to look at computer graphic animation, it was probably at its most early stage and cutting edge in a way. So back in the 90s, you would go to events in America with literally thousands of presentations from many software developers creating software that is now feeding into what we would consider state of the art in terms of animation, pretty much owned and developed by many of the big and very few of them large companies that we all know today, that are the brands that head up effectively the animation industry. And in a sense, what the bottom line of this project is attempting to achieve is really to interrogate that space so that we can really understand where the research gaps in computer science, in the computer science sector and computer graphic imaging, potential future of which really lie. But to interrogate that, it's really good to have problems, really good meaty problems. And as you can see with all the fantastic projects that have just been covered, the fashion and textile space provides us with some fantastically meaty problems because it is so technically challenging and complex. So this project is really looking at changing high streets, which is an understatement at this point in time with COVID. The cultural sector, which is growing rapidly, and we have, ever increasing engagement with museums, and particularly fashion being a huge attraction. The V&A had something like 400,000 or 500,000 visitors during the course of the Alexander McQueen show, and exhibitions like Dior, etc., are huge hits. Of course, the increasing engagement with gaming, online experiences, the concept of digital skins and digital influencers. All of these elements require dress and have great potential for us to explore our identity within. And another parallel to this is the issue around sustainability in fashion and our increasing consumption of fashion. And of course, with that comes the production of lots of stuff which we don't necessarily use very much once we've acquired it. And that doesn't set us in very good stead in terms of landfill. And so really this piece is beginning to look at where online and digital experiences broadly can take us in terms of different types of experience that sit around the sort of fashion, dress and identity space. So Dino has been working particularly over lockdown in really developing really complex object forms. So at this point, we're not designing anything specifically. We're really hacking into the system, looking at what is state of the art in terms of movement and poise, AI, machine learning, and really grappling with the complexity of objects, particularly around cloth. We selected a sort of 18th century dress type shape, which was based on a pattern that I worked on a couple of decades ago. Because of its complexity, it's multi-layered. Cloth in computer graphic imaging terms tends to behave a bit like cling film. So programming it, is really complex. It tends to stick to itself or break or work through the object. So when you start layering up textiles in CGI, it becomes extremely challenging. So that, in addition to a number of different effects and looking at particle physics and the kinds of experiences that we could be generating, these are a sort of a palette of ideas, if you like, that we're beginning to explore. And just to give you a sense of that, this is pretty high fidelity, so I'm afraid, unfortunately, it's a bit glitchy, but it'll give you some idea with why on earth have we got water in there. Again, it's challenging how the cloth is behaving. Can we imitate or give the impression of drag on cloth? Can that work through the sort of water system? And what kind of effects do these provide us as we consider how we might consider our digital selves and the potential for textiles and dress in virtual spaces? And particularly as we've got an ever evolving Instagramming environment where we buy material, we can see that consumers buy objects, garments that they wear at parties, and then I'm afraid often return them, having worn things with labels in them, which makes for a pretty, as I've said before, quite unsustainable ecosystem at the moment in terms of fashion companies then receiving those returns and not really being able to sort of recycle them, particularly things like party wear, where there's a lot of plastics involved in the materiality of fashion, sequins and decorative elements. So the next steps for us are going to be working with fashion designer Maria Grasch-Vogel. We're also working with the V&A and partners Hillischen and University College London, who are bringing to this the sort of anthropology that we need, the sense of what we as humans require and desire in these kinds of spaces. The project has about another year and a half to run, and whilst we're really mindful of generating things that are complex, it's that complexity that we find fascinating, because they are going to feed us with the research questions of the future. But in the meantime, we're also really concerned with making things that are beautiful, beguiling, and experiences that we really want to work with. And most importantly, providing companies with the agency to both create the visual material that we could be working with in terms of experiences, as well as the tools, the software and the hardware that we're going to be needing for the longer term in order to make the most of computer graphic imaging, as I understand its potential to be.
Great, thank you, Jane and Matthew. Matthew, if I could invite you back into the grouping. I've got two main questions, which leaves plenty of time for any questions in the chat. So do reach out if you have a question there. Given the current state of the high street, I thought I'd start off with considering the changing high street that was mentioned in the talk. And also picking up on your project, Matthew, with ILMX Lab, where we're almost looking at a space that performance becomes retail. And I really loved that kind of notion of how to walk in a digital garment. I wonder, Matthew, if you could kind of explore how you think that will develop in time.
I mean, I think it's been a really interesting year, because I think all of the issues that were facing the high street pre-COVID haven't really changed. I mean, of course, the shuttering of stores presents an enormous problem for brands who don't have any other channels, but I think those historical issues were obvious before, that we can buy products whenever we want it, wherever we are, from whatever channel, and it really does begin to beg the question of what is a store for. And yet, kind of immersive experiential retail has always best been described as a store with a coffee shop in it. And I think potentially there might be room for something a bit more exciting than that. And I think you can begin to see with kind of and how easy it's become to generate real-time graphics and how accessible that's becoming, that really there are really amazing opportunities ahead for brands to begin to completely reimagine that store environment, where you can begin to think about products that's created using machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's right for the consumer that walks into a store, meaning that you can hold very little stock. Production on demand that's produced locally is going to allow for you to come into a store and have an immersive experience, come away with a product that's unique to you, and actually create something that feels worthwhile going into. I think we've all been asked the question, what's the value? Why do we need to go anywhere at the moment? If you're going to go somewhere, it needs to be spectacular and it needs to be exciting. And we have all of the tools available to us to do that. And it's becoming more affordable to do. You can see the impact that it has on consumers, audience, attendees. It makes them enjoy the experience more, value your product more. I think the question really is, why hasn't it happened already?
Absolutely. Jane, yesterday I was watching the Business of Fashion Voices conference, fascinating speakers that were involved there, and they were looking at, again, my question to Matthew was performance as retail, but actually you mentioned fashion as museum or fashion as game, and what came out from yesterday's discussion was fashion as Netflix. I wonder if you had a comment on how your project in particular may allow us to try on the Crown's dresses.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this is the point, is that, as Matthew says, the high street's completely changed. I don't think we're looking at shopping spaces necessarily in the same way anymore, but we're going to have lots of spaces to do stuff in, creative stuff in. And I'm afraid, being a child of the 80s, I can remember the time when the high street didn't look anything like what's now sort of slightly falling apart. And artists moved in droves, which was fantastic. And we then had many, many spaces within which to create. And I think, but what we didn't have then was digital media. And we had lots of other stuff, but the potential for that mashup now is fantastic. So then when you look at what museums have to offer, I mean, the Victorian Albert Museum alone have several 100,000 garments that will never see the light of day. There just isn't the exhibition time in my lifetime to see all these pieces. But those archives are incredible, and the quality of the garments are mint condition. And the new facilities in Stratford beyond 2023-2024 with the East Bank project, for example, which the V&A will be part of, as will University of the Arts London, will suddenly give us access to archives at a level that we've never known before. And access is the key. So normally things like archives have been that do not touch, a bit like your presentation, that do not touch. We can't handle, for conservation reasons, these very valuable pieces. But if we can experience them in different ways and be in them, I'm afraid I'm still, the kid at heart. The digital dressing up box is what I'm aiming for. And the potential for that archive to be in film and games, to be used in different ways, to be deployed in different ways, they are fantastic assets. And so the boundaries then begin to blur across what we call fashion and retail and museum experience. It really is how fashion can offer a much broader cultural engagement and the opportunity for experience across all of these platforms. We haven't even begun to yet realise. The shift into real time is the challenge, and Matthew exhibited cutting edge real time as it stands, which is still quite blocky, a long way to go. The animations that we're working on still take days to render, so that's not even close to being real time. Until we can get that quality through. That's the real.
Thank you, Jane. I'm conscious of timing, and I want to bring in this question from Nikki Matthews, just on that last point, because Nikki's asking, can virtual try-on reduce the return rates for online purchasing, and how close is that for mass market? Well, when we're considering garments taking days to render, it depends the quality that we're going on. Matthew, I wonder from your perspective, in the projects that you've been working on, if you could answer that one from your side.
I mean, I think that's the hope for the industry, and you see all of the virtual try-on technologies that are available right now are beginning to focus on that. But I think, to Jane's point, there's a bigger opportunity here, because that question refers to kind of virtual try-on for physical products. Can we begin to shift the industry away from physical products into digital products, into an entirely new revenue stream, where I guess that vision of the AR cloud and metaverse begins to filter into our real world? And what opportunity creatively does that begin to produce? So I think, yes, it can, and I'm sure it will as body tracking becomes more accurate, as cloth simulation improves. You'll see all of those things. There are some out in market already, but I think there's a bigger opportunity there.
I think the monetization is going to be the issue. We interestingly, over lockdown, apparently the sale of skins in gaming, i.e. these other sort of digital dressings of ourselves, have rocketed. So there's definitely the potential for us to consider the monetization of our identity in different forms across different platforms and different experiences. And Matthew rightly points to that potential. So in a way, indirectly, that could achieve, arguably, a more sustainable form of consumption with this problem of fashion. It's both a challenge as well as an opportunity, I think, the fashion world. I'm just wondering, Lynn, should we open up the questions a little bit? There's a fantastic question from Dino in the chat to Alfredo. I don't know if you can see it. Because he's asking Alfredo, how do you distribute credit across multiple co-creators, which I think is such a good question. If we can open up to the last part of the session. Back to everybody.
I can start with that, Jane, and then if anyone has another question. So basically, what at the moment we do that it's a manually spreadsheet. So we track the transactions of each designer and each design or manually on a spreadsheet. But the idea of the BFTT project is to automate and to leave this all these creative transactions very transparent. So when you purchase an item, you know every single designer that contributed in the designing process, and also how much rewards and how much royalties each one is receiving. But just on a royalties perspective, at the moment we share 30% of the royalties with the community, and then 20% goes to the designer, the head designer, and 10% is divided by the designers that contributed in any kind of aspects to improve the design. Is a very manual process now, and you cannot see happening in real life. But that's the idea of the BFTT project as well, is to make this more transparent, friendly for either both the consumer and the designer.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. We might well have come to the end of our session. Is there one more question that I can draw from the panel at all? I don't know, Kate, whether you had any thoughts on any of the projects that have been discussed.
I think for me, you know, the potential for these technologies is just so mind-blowing, and I haven't seen, even though we all work together in various ways, it's always really incredible to hear more. And you know, the only thing I really wanted to say was it's such a shame that, ironically, on this this sort of way of communicating to each other, we can't actually see the real sophistication that there is behind these platforms. I mean, I've been lucky to see them, including your work, Jane, in the flesh, so to speak, and it really has, you know, come forward in leaps and bounds. And I quite look forward to being able to be in a room together to be able to witness that again. Maybe this technology will catch up with everybody in the future.
Well, that's a lovely thought. Despite the benefits of digital and the amazing things that we're all doing, I think that we can't wait to sort of operate in a more physical platform and share these discussions further. So I'm just going to thank everybody that's tuned into this session, and also thank sincerely my colleagues and our BFTT partners, Alfredo, Peter, Kate, Matthew, Lynn and Shama. You know, really a rich discussion, lots to continue. This is just a taster. We're going to be working with Future Fashion Factory to develop something with Beyond for next year. Thank you everybody for joining us for this session. Really exciting, and look forward to TBC, as they say, to continue on our data-driven design journeys in the future.